Chapter 6, The Vietnam War. Welcome to Chapter 6 of Vietnam, A Journey Through History and Culture by ChatGPT and Video Geek Sparrow. In this chapter, we will delve into the deeply consequential and complex Vietnam War, a conflict that profoundly shaped Vietnam and had far-reaching global implications. The Vietnam War, also known as the Second Indochina War, spanned from the mid-1950s to the mid-1970s. It was a prolonged and brutal conflict that involved North Vietnam, supported by its communist allies, and South Vietnam, backed by the United States and other anti-communist forces. The war was a culmination of political, ideological, and geopolitical tensions that had simmered since the end of the First Indochina War. The origins of the Vietnam War can be traced back to the division of Vietnam under the Geneva Accords in 1954, which sought to temporarily separate the country along the 17th parallel. The Democratic Republic of Vietnam, led by Ho Chi Minh in the north, aimed to reunify Vietnam under communist rule, while the anti-communist government of South Vietnam, led by Ngo Dinh Diem, resisted such reunification. The United States became increasingly involved in Vietnam, driven by its Cold War policy of containing the spread of communism. Initially providing financial and military aid to South Vietnam, the U.S. gradually escalated its military involvement, sending troops and conducting airstrikes to support the South Vietnamese government. The Vietnam War was characterized by intense fighting, guerrilla warfare, and devastating military strategies. The North Vietnamese forces, known as the Viet Cong, utilized guerrilla tactics, blending in with the civilian population and launching surprise attacks on South Vietnamese and U.S. forces. The U.S., in turn, employed conventional military tactics, including massive bombings, search and destroy missions, and the use of chemical agents such as Agent Orange. The war had a profound impact on the Vietnamese people, both in the north and the south. Villages were destroyed, infrastructure was devastated, and countless lives were lost. The war also gave rise to widespread protests and anti-war movements around the world, as people questioned the moral and strategic justifications for U.S. involvement in Vietnam. One of the most iconic and controversial events of the war was the Tet Offensive in 1968. The North Vietnamese and Viet Cong launched a coordinated series of surprise attacks on South Vietnamese cities and U.S. military installations during the Lunar New Year holiday known as Tet. Although the offensive resulted in significant casualties for the North Vietnamese forces, it shattered the perception of U.S. invincibility and fueled anti-war sentiments in the United States. The Vietnam War became a deeply divisive issue within American society, leading to protests, demonstrations, and a growing anti-war movement. The images and stories of the war, broadcasted by the media, sparked public outrage and calls for an end to the conflict. Over time, the U.S. public sentiment shifted, and political leaders began to reassess their strategy. In 1973, the Paris Peace Accords were signed, bringing about a ceasefire and the withdrawal of U.S. forces from Vietnam. However, the conflict continued, as fighting between North and South Vietnam persisted. In 1975, North Vietnamese forces launched a major offensive, resulting in the fall of Saigon, the capital of South Vietnam, and the reunification of the country under communist rule. The Vietnam War had come to an end, leaving a deep scar on the landscape and psyche of Vietnam and its people. The Vietnam War's legacy is complex and multifaceted. It resulted in the loss of millions of lives, the displacement of civilians, and the long-lasting physical and psychological effects of warfare. It also led to a period of economic hardship and political challenges for Vietnam as it embarked on a path of post-war reconstruction. In the years following the war, Vietnam underwent significant changes. The government implemented economic reforms and opened the country to foreign investments, gradually transitioning to a market-oriented economy. Vietnam also sought reconciliation and normalized relations with former adversaries, including the United States. Today, the Vietnam War remains an indelible part of Vietnam's history and collective memory. It serves as a reminder of the devastating consequences of war and the resilience of the Vietnamese people in the face of adversity. Join us in Chapter 7, Reunification, as we explore the aftermath of the Vietnam War and the process of reunifying a nation torn apart by decades of conflict. Thank you for listening to Vietnam, A Journey Through History and Culture by ChatGPT and Video Geek Sparrow. Stay tuned for more captivating chapters in our exploration of Vietnam's rich and diverse past.